Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the MattyRocks Experience, the Instagram live sessions. Tonight I will be bringing in my guest very shortly. I just want to wish everyone a safe and healthy time around the United States. I know that we've had some bad weather that has impacted a lot of the country, so I hope everyone is safe during this time. I will be bringing in my guest here very shortly. Singer, guitarist, and local Minneapolis rocker, Mr. Johnny O'Neill. Johnny
There you
O'Neill.
go. How's it going, Maddie?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for joining me tonight.
Sure. This is a little different setup here with the phone.
Yeah, the Instagram, they're very strict on how they allow you to do the live. So,
Uh-huh.
but here we are. Technology is working, and we are here. So thanks for joining me tonight. And Happy New Year to you.
Well, likewise. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything going well for you in 2021? Have you transitioned good?
Oh, it's been an outstanding start to the year. Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I have a way of weathering calamities that the rest of the country is unfortunately, suffering. But for some reason, I seem to thrive sometimes when that kind of thing happens. So yeah, this year has been no exception.
Right on. And it's so nice that our temperatures are above zero, which is great.
Yeah.
So Johnny, what have you been doing during the pandemic, in this quarantine time to keep yourself musically in the groove?
Well, I recorded and released my first solo album. Actually, I started recording that in May of last year, and had all the tracks in the can as of November, but wanted to wait till 2021 to release it. I figured we had enough going on in 2020, so I wanted to put that in the rearview mirror before I put it out. So that just came out January 21st, so it's not even a month out. And along with that, in the meantime, the album, I'm doing all the guitar tracks, all vocals, but I wanted to put a band together as well to play out live shows. So that was the other project. Once the record was recorded, I started recruiting musicians. There's one fellow that is with me on the record that's in the band that I have. Joe Becker, my drummer, is on all the tracks, but essentially just the two of us on the album. But I also had the great fortune to recruit John Funk, my comrade in Six String Crime. He's been with a band called the Good Bars here in town for a number of years. And then a good friend of mine, Benny Craig, who goes back to the 80s hard rock days when Dare Force was active. He was in a band called Paradox. So
Oh yes.
we got all the players in place. And in fact, I'm at my house right now. We have a studio in the basement, and they're downstairs. We're going to rehearse as soon as we have a wrap on this. So yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you've been busy so far. Johnny, if there was one thing during this entire time that we've been in quarantine and, all the stuff that's been going on, something that you have never really thought about yourself before that you've really zeroed in on, what would you say that has been?
Oh, resiliency, I guess, would probably be the thing. And also to try and, I said earlier about sometimes thriving when others are struggling. I don't mean to diminish others' pain. I know it's been an extremely difficult year, and longer than a year, actually. But I've always tried to, make the best out of difficult situations and take the time to make an opportunity that maybe someone else wouldn't see it as an opportunity, but to try and do things that, take advantage of a situation that seemingly is really really sucks.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, recording a solo album, I figured I couldn't play all live. The band I had a version of Dare Force that I resurrected about 3 years ago. Well, actually almost 4 years ago now. We were actually set to record another album, and the the last incarnation of the group, I basically was the lone liberal, if you will. And between the pandemic and politics, it just became an untenable situation. So I decided to kind of go my own way, and they're doing their own thing. And I had never put out a solo album before, and the fellow that I started Dare Force with, Brian Bart, who I've known since I was 9 years old, I called him and kind of picked his brains as to what he thought might be a good thing to do. He says, "Why don't you record a solo album?" And I had thought of that in the back of my mind for many years, but just didn't have the opportunity to do it. Well, of course, what better time to launch a solo career in the midst of a global pandemic? So
Right.
started doing tracks last May. I did all the vocal and rhythm guitar tracks to a click track. I didn't even have a drummer at that point. And the band was put together through a series of messenger calls, if you will. I joke about buying stock in Messenger, but got a hold of Joe and said, might you be interested in playing on my album? He said, send me some tracks, and he jumped right in. And so we tracked out at Winterland Studios last summer. He banged out like 7 tunes in an afternoon. And I wanted to put some keys on the record as well. I thought that might be kind of, I wanted to expand the musical palette, if you will, beyond what I had done with Dare Force, kind of take listeners on a sonic journey and add some more textures and dynamics and so forth. And so Joe said, well, I've got this guy that I would be interested in playing some keyboard tracks. I said, oh, who might that be? He said, well, it's the original guitarist or the original keyboardist from UFO. And I went, what? I don't know if you know anything about British heavy metal, but UFO is like creme de la creme.
Oh, yes.
And Michael Schenker is one of my all-time guitar heroes. So I just about fell out of my chair when Joe told me he knew Danny. Joe had been in a couple bands, Funhouse and Rattling Bones, and they were out in New York for a number of years. And he met Danny out there. And so another messenger called to Danny, and I said, would you be interested in playing on some tracks? And he lives in the south of France, so I sent him what I had, and he was interested. So he's on 3 tracks on the album. But aside from Danny, Joe, and myself, there's one track that features the original drummer from Dare Force, Mark Miller, who sadly passed away in 2012. But I had a track I'd done with him years ago that never was released, and so that's on the record. I wrote some lyrics and did vocals for that. So Mark makes an appearance on the record, but essentially it's Joe and I. And then once the record was done, it was time to start thinking about putting this band together, because we certainly want to go out and play live shows and promote the record once we get through this damn pandemic. So we're working hard, brand new band, and it's a departure for me in that I started Dare Force when I was 18 years old, many moons ago, and we had an 11-year run, 76 to 87, played full time, and then the initial run ended, and I made kind of a life detour. I headed out to Columbus to attend the Ohio State University and got a doctorate in clinical psychology. So my day gig is a clinical psychologist, which I've done for the past 20 years. But being a solo artist and having a band with my moniker, I wanted to kind of take on the role of a benevolent dictator, if you will, and decided it was time for me to really call the shots. And not that I'm ruling with an iron fist or anything, but it just was time for me to do that. So
Right on.
that's been a very interesting change for me too.
Right on. Well, Johnny, if you would, take MattyRocks listeners and viewers back to the early years of your life in Golden Valley, Minnesota, in Minneapolis,
Mm-hmm.
and give us some insight to how music came into your life.
Well, that's an easy one, and I'm sure you've probably heard a similar tale from several, gazillion other musicians. But sitting in my grandmother's living room watching the Ed Sullivan Show, this little-known British combo called the Beatles happens to make an appearance. I think it was February of '64. I can remember it. It's like a flashbulb memory. I was just completely captivated. I had heard a couple of their tunes. My dad had a car that didn't have a radio that was in the shop, and we had a rental car with a little AM radio. And I remember hearing, I want to hold your hand and she loves you. And, I thought that was very cool. But then to see them live on television, I was just completely, utterly mesmerized. And, I was all of, 5 years old at the time, but I already knew that was it. I mean, I was an addict from that point on. I wanted to be a musician. I incessantly pestered my parents for the next couple of years to get a guitar, and they finally got me one when I was 8 years old. And I mentioned Brian Bart. We grew up in Golden Valley. He moved into the neighborhood when I was 9 years old. We literally grew up across the street and had garage bands in elementary school. The music teacher at our elementary school happened to be Bob Dylan's younger brother, David Zimmerman. So he actually was a big supporter of us when we were kids. We, did performances at the school, and later played the Orpheum, which he had owned for a while. But Brian and I were, we call ourselves the Blood Brothers. We were 10 years old, and true story, we pricked our thumbs and rubbed them together and said we're going to be friends for life, and that pact has continued to this day. So
good for you.
Yeah. So Brian's he engineered, recorded, mixed, mastered the album, co-produced it with me. He's got his handwork, his engineering genius is all over the records. So, but he and I are, it's like a Vulcan mind meld when we get in the studio together. You can almost answer each other's sentences and that kind of thing. So just a really...
Was there any specific musicians, guitar players that were influences to you early on that you really looked up to, besides the ones you mentioned already?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean the Beatles, but after that, Allman Brothers. I started playing slide guitar when I was 14 years old. So Johnny Winter still is a huge influence, probably one of the greatest slide guitarists of all time. Duane Allman, of course. The usual cast of characters: Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Wishbone Ash. I don't know if you've heard of them, but Andy Powell from that group. Oh my God, Thin Lizzy.
Oh yeah.
I've always been in two guitar bands, so I'm drawn to that kind of a setup. UFO would be an exception, but I mean there's so many players. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top would be another huge influence. So it was funny. I had the first rock concert I ever attended. It was my 12th birthday, and it was June of 1970, and I saw this band called Alice Cooper that was then known as The Depot, which now, of course, is First Avenue. And
right.
The Depot had only been open for about 2 months. It was just a couple of months after Joe Cocker had opened the venue. And so that was another, big influence. Alice Cooper, David Bowie, Zeppelin, of course. So I kind of, a different, a broad range of influences growing up. It wasn't all just, headbanging stuff, but that, just to give you a few names off the top of my head.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned some of those earlier playing years, when you were younger, playing in the school and at the Orpheum and all that stuff.
Hmm.
What did some of those experiences teach you about becoming a touring musician? What things did you take away from those experiences that helped you to prepare for that journey as a touring musician?
Yeah. Well, and we didn't play the Orphan when we were kids. We the
No, later.
actually, yeah. The first 82, well, the Air Force got started in the late 70s, and 82 was quite a year for us. We January of 82, we did our first big show opening for Shooting Star. They had a couple hits back in the day. And the very next weekend, I mean, literally the next weekend, we opened for Triumph, and then headlined a show in San Juan, Puerto Rico the week after. And I mean, throughout that year, the year ended with us opening for Kiss in Sioux City, Iowa. So in 82, that was kind of like our first taste of really doing some really big shows. And, just learning to project yourself on a stage of that size, also just enjoying the complete and utter joy of being bathed in the blue of white light of a super trooper spotlight, shining down on you, and looking up and seeing, faces in a crowded theater in the balcony, and just relishing in the best drug in the world, adrenaline, when you've got 4, 5, 8, 10,000 people who are plugged into what you're doing, and there's a feedback loop of energy. There's nothing like it. So just learning how to project your stage presence. I mean, beyond it's a totally different vibe, of course, when you're playing in a smaller club, and there's elements of both types of shows that I enjoy. But of course, I mean, the ultimate is to get in front of as big an audience as you can. So you're trying to project energy and connect with the audience, and learning how to handle the adrenaline too. I've never had an issue with stage fright. In fact, I've always thrived on huge shows, but still you have to kind of be able to harness that energy, if you will. And so learning how to do that, and pacing yourself, and how do you draw up a set list that kind of takes the audience on a journey. You're not going to have one dynamic throughout the show. You want to start off strong and have a midpoint where maybe you bring it down a bit, and then of course close with a real climactic ending. So learning about that kind of stuff, and just how you survive when you're playing 50 weeks out of the year, 4, 5, 6 nights a week, for 11 years straight. Yeah. So but I do it all over again in a heartbeat.
Right on. Take us back to the earlier time when you and Brian came together to form Dare Force. How did it come together and take shape?
Well, as I mentioned, he and I had garage bands together in elementary school, and he actually, his folks divorced, and he ended up moving to California with his mom. So this was like junior high. I actually started playing in clubs while he was in California. I started playing in clubs when I was 14. I was recruited by some what I thought were older guys. They were 18-year-old guys that had graduated from high school, and so I started playing clubs. My parents, they said, well, we I'd like to meet these guys. Why don't you have them over to the house? And my dad said, okay, well, you can play with them, but there's 2 rules. One, you can't play out of state, and no bars. Well, our first gig was a bar in Iowa. So, but by 10th grade, I'd actually was playing quite a bit. I managed to finish 10th grade, and then I dropped out. not because of a lack of interest in school. I always was a good student and really enjoyed school, but I wanted to really give it the best shot I could with, trying to, I seriously wanted to pursue, the biggest stages I could. So 10th grade, I drop out and proceeded to play in a couple of bands. There was a band I was in called Archangel when I was 17, and there were a couple of other guys in the band. The band was run by two older brothers, and I was 17 at the time. They were like 28 and 30, and to me that was like, oh my gosh, these guys are really old. But the singer and the drummer were not too much older than I was. So I had this notion that I was going to try and take those two guys and start a little mini Led Zeppelin. Well, the two brothers that ran Archangel got wind of my plot and said, John, I think it's time that you start your own band. We're going to let you go, not because of a lack of musicianship. We never would have hired you if you didn't have the chops, but we can't have insurrection in the ranks. So I was replaced by Yanni, the keyboardist in that band, after that happened. And by that time, Brian had moved back from California and actually managed to finish high school. And so the summer after he graduated, I called him. I said, hey, let's start our own band. And that was the beginning of it, summer of '76. And found a drummer through back then there were want ads in the back of the Star Tribune that, musicians listing. And so we found a guy who was actually still in high school, Mark Miller, who was going to school in Burnsville. And then Brian had a friend he had gone to high school with, Brian Lawrenson, our original bassist. And so the four of us, it was funny. We'd rehearse at Mark's house, and we had this bomber Dodge Dart that Brian had. And I remember cobbling, trying to get a couple bucks for gas each way, to rehearse. We were in Minneapolis, and Mark was in Burnsville, so it was, a bit of a hike. But we, spent the next few months, rehearsing and working up some cover tunes. But we started writing material right from the get-go. We were completely dedicated. We had, the band houses, and it was, that was our life, 24/7 rock and roll, all through our 20s. So,
when I was a little kid, I always wondered, because I always saw the Dare Force van, the truck. You guys had a truck. It was probably your what you hauled around the equipment in.
Yeah, well, we had we had a couple of different vehicles. Early on, we had a series of school buses, and we'd paint them black, and we'd pull through these podunk towns. And I think some of these people thought that, oh my God, it's Charlie Manson family coming into town or something.
I think you guys had this picture on some of the vehicles.
Well, that was Firepower. That was put out in '89, actually, and that was with a different version of the band. That was the last release we did in the '80s. But the original four-piece, we progressed to. We had a one of those rider rental trucks, like a 26-foot truck. We bought one of those used, and then the crew we had a bona fide road crew, and we hauled our own production. We had a full lighting and PA rig, and packed the truck to the gills. But the band, we had I don't know if you remember the JFK era of Cadillac limos, but we had one of those for us. So we tool around in the limo, and the crew would ride in the rider truck, and that was our mode of transportation for a number of years. And then we ended up we ditched the limo. Was great, except in the wintertime the heat didn't work so well, so we finally got a van for us. And
well, it was funny because this vehicle was always parked in Maple Grove in Eagle Lake, and I'd always drive past it when I was a kid on my bike. And if you would have told me that I'd be sitting with you 40 some years later, I would have never have believed it. But I always remember passing that van, and it was on West Eagle Lake. It was Eagle Lake Drive in Maple Grove.
Uh-huh.
And I passed by it on my bike all the time. And I always remember looking at the logo on it, and it was you guys, your faces. And here we are 40 some years later.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I have the same feeling when if anyone had told me, 30 years ago that I'd be launching a solo career and talking with you on a podcast and still in this crazy business, I would have thought perhaps maybe you're in need of some psychological services, but yeah. But once you have it in your blood and you're infected, it's something I have to do. It's my therapy, and it's just something I was born to do. So
right
I've been really fortunate. I lead a dual life these days. I'm Dr. John during the day and Johnny O'Neill at night, and been running on about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours of sleep for almost the last years since this whole thing took off. And at the same time, my psychology practice, I actually went into solo private practice about 1.5 years ago. So I'm launching a solo career as a musician, but also at the same time becoming a solopreneur in my practice, and both of them are going. This is my 20th year of private practice, and it's the busiest I've ever been in my life. So between that and this record and the new band, it's like life's too short for sleep. There's too much to do, and time is of the essence. So yeah.
Was there a story behind the name Dare Force? Is there any type of unique story?
Yeah, there is. Actually, the band started off with the name Alexis, and you were asking earlier about guitarists that were big influences, and I neglected to mention another very big influence was Tommy Bolin. And Tommy Bolin was from Sioux City, Iowa, went on to play with the James Gang and Deep Purple, and then had his own solo career. But when he was with James Gang, there was a song on one of their albums called Alexis that I thought was cool, and I thought that was a great name for a band. So the initial name of the band was Alexis, and we walk into a record store one day and saw this big display for this band called Alexis on Mercury Records. I thought, well, it's probably time to think of a different name. So I wanted something that, when I was thinking of another name, I thought, well, first of all, I wanted to come up with something that no one else would have. And I like the idea of having 2 words. And at that time, the Star Wars thing had just come out, and, there was the Force, and I liked the word force. There was different connotations. I mean, you could think of it as, there's a physical force, but also there's an energy force, a group of people, if you will. So I was kind of thinking of, well, how can I use that word with another one to, kind of, capture something unique. And I was literally going through, there was, Air Force, of course. Well, I certainly wasn't going to call the band Air Force, but I thought, well, perhaps I could kind of play on that. That would sound familiar, but yet it would have a totally different connotation. So I literally was going through a list of consonants in my head, Care Force, no, I don't think that sounds so good. Bear Force, no. Dare Force, that might work. So the more I was thinking about it, I thought, yeah, I really like that. So I go to the rest of the guys. Okay, here's our new name, Dare Force. I don't know. That's not so good. I said, trust me. Just go with me on this one. And so that's how that came to be. And, of course, as time wore on, it's,
It's stuck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, the logo that we had back in, I don't know when that came out, 1980 or something. I mean, you see that now. It's as soon as you see it from a distance, what the name of the band is, or who the band is, I should say. So, yeah.
You toured with many big names. Okay, is there one influential band that you guys graced the stage with during those entire years?
Well, the Kiss show was quite cool. We didn't do an extended tour with any one band, but we opened for just a gazillion groups. I mean, everyone from, oh my God, Ted Nugent and Kansas and Rat, UFO. I could just go on and on and on. But the Kiss show was pretty wild. That was the end of '82, December of '82, and we got a call from our agency at the time. I think we were booking through Marsh Productions, if I remember correctly. And the day of the show, this was like early afternoon. Hey, you guys want to play with Kiss tonight in Sioux City? And we thought for about 2 seconds, yeah, we can do that. They were on tour with Kiss was open. Pat Travers was the opening act for Kiss at the time, and they had done a show the night before in Denver, and apparently Travers got snowed in. There was a big blizzard in Denver, so their trucks couldn't get out of Denver, and so they were looking for an opening act at the last minute. So that limo I was telling you about earlier, well, I commandeered that like a bat out of hell from Minneapolis through the most hellacious snowstorm you could imagine. You go down 35 for most of the way, and then it gets into 2-lane highways. And there were times on that road where the snow was so high that it was down to 1 lane, and you don't know you could have an oncoming car hit you at any time. But I thought, we're going to get to the show if it kills us. So we get to the show. It's about half an hour before we're supposed to go on. Obviously, no time for a sound check, and we're back up the truck to the loading dock, and all hands on deck, this kind of thing, getting the gear out of the truck. And this was the 10th anniversary tour. They're promoting Creatures of the Night. It was the last tour they did with makeup before the Unmasked era. So I had no idea of what they looked like. And so there's this guy that's in the truck helping our crew haul out some of the gear. Well, it turns out to be Paul Stanley. And I'm looking around. I see this guy standing, dressed in leather from head to toe. I figured he had to be somebody. He walks up, sticks out his hand. Hey, you must be with the front act. I'm Gene Simmons. How you doing? So just, really super nice guys. We ended up, they didn't stay the night, but we had rooms booked at I don't know if it was a Hilton or something, but we had some cocktails with them after the show. They had a bar on the top floor, and so we were talking with them, and so they left that night. Whatever date they had the next day, we stayed that night, and we're eating breakfast in the morning. In the cafeteria of the hotel, and we had these patrons coming up thinking that we were Kiss. Of course, no one knew who, what they looked like. So we were kind of looking at each other, okay, asking for autographs and this kind of thing. And so we thought, okay, we're just going to run with this thing. So I became Paul Stanley for a while, and our bassist, was Gene Simmons. And so there's some poor souls that are running around with, autographs that they've had that they think are genuine, but actually they're autographs that we provided. But we didn't want to, spoil their fun, and we were having a hoot with it too. So yeah.
Well, the cat's out of the bag now.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah. So sorry.
A lot of memorable moments, I'm sure, during the Dare Force run. I mean, 3 studio albums, many tours. Was
4,
it hard
actually,
to put Dare Force to rest?
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, there was that initial run that we had that ended in '87, and then a year or two went by, and Brian Bart had suggested, well, let's reform the band and give it one last shot to really try. Back in that era was like the big thing was getting a major label deal, of course. So we put a new version of Dare Force together with a new rhythm section and a singer by the name of Carl Young. And we put out Firepower, which is what you have behind you. That was in '89, but that's not the original group. But that released, did well. I mean, I'm really proud of the release, but as I'm sure in this business, timing is everything. Well, here we are, the tail end of the big hair, heavy metal era. We released Firepower in '89. Well, grunge is on the doorstep. So poor timing there. And by that time I was, pushing late 20s, getting close to 30. And I had it in the back of my mind that if I hadn't gotten signed by that time, I wasn't going to be, 40 years old, making a living playing in a bar band. So I actually got a GED in my late 20s and proceeded to go from a GED to a PhD in 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I started off at then Lakewood Community College, part-time, transferred into the U of M as an honors undergrad, got my bachelor's degree at the tender age of 35, and moved right out to Columbus to go to grad school. And I completed my doctorate and did a 2-year postdoc in Columbus, and then met my wife, who's from Dayton. And then we moved back to Minnesota in 2001, started a family, and I wanted to get back into music, but certainly getting my psychology practice launched and having young kids, there just wasn't a whole lot of time to do that. So a few years goes by, and I started kind of putting out the feelers, to see if there might be a group that I could hook up with, and played with a couple of bands for a little while. But actually, there was a group I had for a while called Crossroader. There was a guitarist by the name of Kelly Peterson, and he had been around for many years. And so I called Kelly, and he and I were writing together for a while, and then we put out an EP called Crossroader, an eponymous release. That was back in 2015. And kind of the usual story. We had a killer vocalist on the record. It's a 6-song EP. Put that out. Well, shortly thereafter, the singer Sean Smith goes to his audiologist with hearing problems, and she tells him, "You keep on performing, you're going to go deaf altogether." And I forget if it was his left or right ear. And at that point, he said, "Well, sorry guys, but I'm going to have that up." So Kelly and I were really, I don't know, late 2016, and so we're kind of scratching our heads thinking, what do we do now? And I said, "Well, Kelly, what would you think about actually coming back out with a new version of Dare Force?" And he had said, I thought you might have that in mind. So before I did that, though, I wanted to get the blessing from Brian Bart. And by that time, Brian was full-time in he owns a studio, and that was his full-time gig, and he really wasn't in a position to to go out and do gigs and that kind of thing. And so he said, "Yeah, that'll be fine as long as you can get one other guy from the original band, and I'd be fine if you use the name again." And so we had Brian Lawrence from the original band joined the fold, and so we came back out with that, and then we put out another album in 2018 with the reformed version of Dare Force called "Calling Your Name." And that was 2018. Well, 2019 comes along, and Kelly decides that he wants to kind of focus on stuff that he had written over the years, and maybe put out something of his own. So he left. We had another guitarist. We were thinking of recording yet another album that was going to come out. We were going to start working on that at the beginning of 2020. And as I mentioned before, it just friction between myself and the other 3 guys just continued to grow with political. If you're an artist, you have to have people of a similar mindset if you're going to create stuff. And my thinking too is, being an artist, part of your job is to bring people's attention to things that are important and to call out bullshit when you see it. And my worldview was quite divergent from the three of those guys, and it just got to the point where it just wasn't working. So they went their way, and at first I was, it was sad. I mean, Dare Force is my baby, if you will. I had it for years, but with the solo project, it turned out to be, again, I mentioned earlier about turning lemons into lemonade, so to speak. Well, that's exactly what happened with the solo project, and now this, my new band. I've put out a record that I think is, I'll put right up there with anything I did with Dare Force. I'm extremely proud of what I did with Dare Force, but I wanted to do something taking that kind of guitar hard rock element, but taking it to the next level. And so I wanted to create something that had more of sonic textures and taking the listener on more of a journey, if you will. So on the record, I've got a track that I wrote when I was 16. It's just me with an acoustic guitar. I've got Danny Peyronel on 3 tracks playing keyboards. There's a lot of different flavors to the album that you wouldn't have heard on a typical Dare Force record. So actually, the demise of the band has turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I am the way this thing is developing is really meeting and surpassing my expectations, and I've been really fortunate to get some pretty heavy hitters in terms of marketing and so forth. Tinderbox Music here in town, I'm sure Krista and those good people. Yep. They're working some campaigns for me, and then also I have a fellow out in California, Michael Brandvold, who has worked with everyone from Taylor Swift to Kiss to Dream Theater. I mean, he's a real heavy hitter in the business, and so he's a publicist, and for all intents and purposes, is developing into my manager. And Michael, if you're listening, we'll be talking. But so anyway, yeah, the record is, we're getting airplay worldwide on internet stations. Oh my gosh. Japan, UK, Germany, Finland, Spain. We put out a video. We're going to get a YouTube campaign going with that next month. And so things are just, the album hasn't even been out for a month yet, and it's already getting a lot of attention. And of course, now the next challenge is to put out another record with the full band, which I certainly intend to do. So I've got these guys learning, they didn't play on the record with the exception of Joe, our drummer, but John, our guitarist, and Benny, our bass player, they're learning the record, and then we're already starting to work on new material for another album. So before too long, there'll be a second Johnny O'Neill record with the full band, and at that point it'll be looking at some kind of a indie label deal, that kind of thing. So
right on.
A lot of stuff going on.
So the one cool thing about this, Johnny, is that I've got the capability I work with some really cool internet stations around the country and around the world. So one of the actual owners of Lucky Star Radio in Santa Clarita, California, is actually tuning in right now, and I know that he would love to probably put your music in rotation. So I'll work with him, and Krista, and we'll see if we can't make that happen.
That would be awesome. I would love that, Matty. Yeah, and thank you. Any support that we are fortunate to receive, I really appreciate that. And that's something too that I've learned along the way. With Dare Force, it's interesting. when I put it back together, I had people coming up to me talking about how they'd seen us play years ago, and musicians too, and talking about, I mean, not to, toot my own horn here too loudly, but, hearing that there were musicians that were inspired to play by coming out to see us play. And it was really kind of a revelation to me, if you will, that to hear some of these people talking about the influence that our music had. And I just was so touched by that, and to realize, the support we've had from people for years, and now to have these people come on board with what I'm doing now, just really means so much to me. And I as an artist, I mean, that's the bottom line, is to really have a relationship with your audience, and to be fortunate enough to have fans like that. And it's really a humbling privilege. And I really, it means more to me than I can say. So.
Well, we'll get it on some stations here in Minnesota, one out of Rochester called RadioRiff.com, and all the way to Los Angeles, and then all the way across the pond to Australia.
Awesome.
Okay?
So
that's my commitment to you.
Okay.
For supporting you. So I know that you had Brian Bart work on this album with you.
Yeah.
What has that meant to you?
Well, we're the blood brothers.
Yep.
I mean, I when it came time to record, well, first of all, Brian was the one that suggested, hey, record a solo album. And I had no intention of working with anybody else. I mean, Brian knows my playing about as well as I do, and he also is able to pull out the best in me. And so there just wasn't even a thought of working with anybody else. And so after all these years of, we have such a history together. It's as I mentioned, there's just such a chemistry. Be able to get that to come out through a set of speakers. Well, Brian, he knows what I'm going for, and it was kind of funny. We started, we got the basic tracks done, and we were starting to work on mixes, and I'd be out at Brian's studio every week or two working, doing. There's a iteration process. I mean, several, multiple iterations of mixes, and each time you'd have a mix, you'd finish the night with the night's work on a CD that he'd burn. And I ended up, I got a 2017 Hyundai Santa Fe SUV. And one of the reasons I bought the car was the last year they made it with a CD player. So, I found myself coming home late at night and plunking in that night's mixes on the way home. He lives out in Excelsior, and I'm in Maplewood, so I had plenty of time to listen to that night's work. And as the mixes progressed, I started thinking, holy shit, this is some pretty good stuff. I mean, his command of the studio and his talent is unsurpassed in my estimation. I mean, he's on a national level in terms of his abilities and so forth, and he's the best in town at what he does. So having him know my style and what I was going for, and just our friendship, that was a huge element of the record as well. That a couple other elements. I had a friend of mine who's got a 1963 Gibson Firebird, and Johnny Winter played a Firebird, and I play slide quite a bit on the record. And so my friend John Damon was kind enough to let me play his guitar on the record. So there's elements of a 63 Firebird, and then the other aspect that was kind of funny too. As I mentioned, I play I play lead, slide, acoustic, and bass on the record. Well, I'm not a bass guitarist. I've never played bass on a recording before, and but at first I thought about a Paul McCartney thing, and I thought, well, I can hack on a kit, but I know my limitations. And so I recruited Joe on drums, but I thought, well, bass I can take a stab at. So I said, and I don't even own a bass, so I get to Brian's and I said, well, what are we going to do with the bass? He goes, well, I've got a 5-string. You're going to play a 5-string bass. So I went, okay, I'll give that a shot. And as it turned out, it became an integral part of the sound of the record. Having that low 5th string just really added a whole new dimension to the low end of the album. And when Benny joined the band, I said, hey, Benny, you're going to have to get yourself a 5-string because there's no way you're going to be able to replicate the riffs on this record and how it sounds without a 5-string. So he just went and got a 5-string. He ordered from a cat in Germany. It's a 5-string Gibson Thunderbird. So we got a Thunderbird and a Firebird and all kinds of cool stuff on the record. So just trying out different things that I hadn't thought of. I mean, that was Brian's idea, but it added a whole new power, if you will, to the record, and it's become a signature part of. Benny's gonna be playing a 5-string live, and it'll be on the next record. And I went out and got a Firebird guitar myself too. I didn't get a 63, but yeah, we're like kids in a candy store again. We're out. I'm running around. I play through Marshall amps, and there's nothing like having a full stack of Marshalls. So we've been on a gear buying spree and, getting stuff shipped from, we found this guy in New Jersey. He's our Marshall connection. And John Funk, the other guitarist, and we are completely addicted to Marshall amplification. So we've talked about forming a Marshall Addict support group, but we found our dealer, this guy Eric, out in New Jersey, and so we're having cabinets and amps shipped to us and
Nice.
All kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's all kinds of energy happening. I'm having a gas. That's all I can say.
Well, you talked about you formed a band, like you formed players behind you. So
right.
Talk about those players who back you musically, and what will they bring to the stage for you?
Well, first of all, they are all stellar musicians. I mean, that was requirement number one. Of course, I wanted to get the best players I could find, but I also wanted to get players of a similar mindset too. You have to have a chemistry, and every group has its own personality, and so I wanted to get players that not to get too far into politics, but there are some, if you listen to the record, actually, there's a song on there called "Tell Me What You Think You Know," and if you listen to the lyrics, I talk about the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombings in 1921 and 300 blacks killed on Black Wall Street, which was a very prosperous part of Tulsa, and a lot of things that people I certainly had not known about. There's another line that talks about redlining districts in the city of Lakes. Well, here in Minnesota, we pride ourselves on being this bastion of progressivism. Well, we've got our flaws too. And I was seeing a show on PBS, I don't know, early part of last year, and they were talking about these racial covenants in real estate transactions that prevented people of color from buying or selling real estate around the Lakes area in Minneapolis. I'd never even knew that stuff existed. And, I'm a Minneapolis boy, raised in Golden Valley, and I watched the show and I was brought to tears. I just was so saddened and just struck by this. And I thought, people need to know about this kind of stuff. So I've got a line that talks about that. And, there's two issues that I think that are important for to be brought to people's attention. One is systemic racism, which is a reality, and white privilege. And, not that I'm going to become the next Bob Dylan or, get really into, politics with music. I I do think that it's important to bring people's attention to things that perhaps, I certainly didn't learn about that when I was a kid in,
Right.
my high school history classes. Anyway, kind of a long, winding answer to your question. I wanted to get people that had similar points of view. If you're going to create music, you have to, there has to be a chemistry and I'm a thinker, and I wanted to get people in the band who were thinkers too. And so I've been. It was funny. Each guy that I called was the first and only guy that I called to recruit. I wasn't going to do a cattle call with, people I didn't know. I had in mind all along exactly who I was going to send a message to recruit, and each one answered the call. But John Funk, my guitarist, is just a fabulous partner. Intelligent fellow, plays in a similar vein to mine, but yet, we complement each other's style quite well. Just one of the nicest people you could ever meet. Benny Craig, my bass player, another fellow who, again, just a great musician, great stage presence, but another thinker. And then my right-hand man throughout this whole process would be Joe Becker, the drummer who's on the record, and he's in my band. And Joe is an amazing guy. I mean, he's a extremely talented drummer, but interesting life story with him too. His parents are actually survivors of the Holocaust, and they came, born and raised in Germany. And actually, English is Joe's second language. He was born here in the States, but grew up with German-speaking parents, and so he has a really unique, a much broader view. I think being able to travel and get out of Minnesota and realize that there are other so many different cultures and so forth to learn about, and so Joe's a pretty worldly guy, and knows. It's amazing the people that he's met along his path. So you put that all together in the same room, and you turn on the amps, and once things start, it's like a freight train. It just we got a real juggernaut happening, and I couldn't be more excited about it. And I tell you, when we get out and play later this year, look out, because we're going to be coming out with, pulling out all the stops and no holds barred. It's going to be powerful. I assure you that.
Well, the album sounds amazing. You all sound amazing on it. And I am jazzed, and I'm looking forward to seeing that live performance. I will be there.
Yeah, well, thank you, Matty. I'll certainly keep you posted.
Absolutely. What's coming up for you musically?
Well, like I said, working up a show with the band, writing material for a new album already. That's the main activities, and of course, getting all this marketing together too. I've got a web page, johnnyoneil.com, JOHNNYONEIL.com, Johnny O'Neill Official on Facebook, and then on Instagram too, of course. And then I've got a YouTube channel. So, getting all that going. We've also had the extremely good fortune, and this was another connection through Brian Bart, but I wanted to shoot a video. And Brian has done a lot of recording with Joey Mullen from Badfinger, and who lives here in town. And Joey has done some videos lately with a couple. You probably have heard of Kurt and Brianna Jorgensen, the Jorgensens. Well, not only are they extremely talented musicians, but they also happen to be fabulous videographers. And they've done some videos for Joey that Brian thought were really good. And so Brian said, well, why don't you give, Kurt Jorgensen a shout and see if, you get a video shoot going with them. So the first single off the record, Snake in the Grass, we've released a video for that at the beginning of this month. And so not only with recording, but we're also going to be shooting another video for another. We'll do another single off the record here pretty soon, and we'll incorporate the Jorgensen's brilliance. I'm so fortunate. I have a great team with Brian in the studio. I've got this couple that just shoot great videos. My marketing team is fabulous. This great band. I mean, it's like I'm just pinching myself. It just is developed beyond my wildest expectations, and I'm just totally thrilled and just excited to see what comes up next.
Right on. Johnny, you've been at this for a very long time in the music business. What is going to be the key ingredient that's going to keep you releasing more music for many more years to come?
Well, it's in my blood. I was born to do this. I don't have any choice. I mean, songs just, pop into my head. My wife will tell you I'm a pretty miserable soul if I don't play guitar for a while or get out and play. So as long as I'm still standing. I mean, Johnny Winter died in a hotel room at 72 on the road. I saw the Stones in 2015. Jagger's running around in his 70s. It's probably I've seen the Stones multiple times going back to 78. The 2015 show, I think, was probably one of the best I've ever seen. And I thought, you know what? Age is, it's a tired cliche, but it's kind of, to some extent, it is just a number, and it's kind of what kind of a mindset you have, and you have to. We all age. That's just a fact of life, but it's not something that should prevent you from, unless you are unfortunate enough to have some kind of physical incapacity or something. But as long as I can physically do what I'm doing, there are people that are out there that'll listen to it. I'm going to continue to put it out. It's just part of my nature. It's in my soul. And also, I think, I've been fortunate to be given, some talents. And I think part of my responsibility is to do something with that and give something back to the world. And in my own very small, humble way, perhaps, make some kind of contribution to this world that improves it at least to some degree, to try and bring some joy into people's lives. So that's a big motivator too.
Good for you. Johnny, I want you to reflect back on your entire musical career to date. And I want you to pick out, what would you say is probably your biggest musical accomplishment to date?
Oh, this record. Absolutely. That's, yeah, no question. It was a challenge, and I'd always thought about doing this, but thinking about it and accomplishing it are two different things. And to hear the end result, not to toot my horn too loudly, but I myself just thought, boy, I think I might have knocked this one out of the park. And I've had that reaction from a number of people. And so to be able to do that is just really validating, reinforcing, and just inspiring. And now to have a full band on board, it takes it to a whole new level. That the other thing on the bucket list is, I've played in Venezuela and throughout the U.S. and Canada, but I want to take the boys across the pond. We want to do some shows in Europe. What I want to do is some shows with Danny Peyronel. He's probably there's about a 6-hour time difference between here and France, but I'd like to get him on stage with us and actually play the tracks that he's on the album. That would be a blast too. So
that'd be cool.
Yeah.
What do you want the world to know about you and your music that maybe they don't know?
Well, that guitar rock is not dead. There's it's every couple of years you'll hear, oh yeah, the demise of hard rock, and kids they're not buying guitars, and heavy metal's going to fall by the wayside, and this kind of thing. And I say, bullshit. The music, this is an established genre that, just like jazz or the blues or classical music, it's music that's here to stay. It's not going to go away. May it wax and wane in popularity, sure, just like any other genre will. But I think that there's still there's new things to capture with that music. It's not dying, and I'm proof of it, if you will, that you can take elements and create a different twist to it, and put your own spin on it, and come up with new things. So, a good example, AC/DC just released another album. It's killer. Those guys are in their mid-70s, and here they are, still producing, in my estimation, rock that's timely, that's current. Their record's doing fantastic. I mean, that's quite an inspiration for me. And so, when I see artists like that, I'm thinking, I think there's still some room. I've got a little bit of gas left in the tank, and I'm going to put the pedal to the metal and go for it.
Good for you. So. Johnny, I'm going to give you the same opportunity that I give every artist that I have the opportunity to sit one-on-one with. And that is a message to MattyRocks listeners and viewers that are going to hear this interview and see this interview around the country and around the world. What would you like to say to them?
Well, first of all, I'd certainly like you to hear my music, check out the new record, and I certainly hope that you enjoy what you hear, and be on the lookout for new material. And to the people that are following me from years past, I can't thank you enough for your continued support. It means all the world to me, and I'm not going to let those people down. I've got a standard that I feel I have to live up to, that I've established with Dare Force, and I certainly think the new band is up to the task. And I think anyone that comes out to see shows will enjoy what they hear and see. And I want you to join me on the ride. I think you'll find it quite enjoyable. So.
Right on. Great message. Johnny, thank you so much for taking the time out for this conversation tonight. It was truly an honor to sit one-on-one with you. Growing up listening to this band, and here we are today. Truly an honor, and I thank you.
Oh, well, Matty, the pleasure is all mine. I'm humbled that you had me on your show, and I thank you so much. And again, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your support, and it's been a pleasure to meet you. So,
right on. Continued success to everything you've got going on in your musical arena, and best of luck to you with this new project. And hope it does very well for you, which I know it will. Absolutely.
Thanks much, Matt. Okay, you take care. Have a great night, brother.
You've heard it here, MattyRocks listeners and viewers. Closing it out with Johnny O'Neill.
All right. Good night, folks.
Yeah, Johnny. MattyRocks out. Wow. A lot of great stories there from Johnny himself. So truly an honor to do that interview. And that was awesome. So thank you all again for tuning into another episode of the MattyRocks Experience Instagram Live Sessions. I hope you enjoyed this one, like I did. And you will see me again next week with another great surprise of an artist, someone who I went to high school with. We'll see you next week.